All right, good morning, everybody. It is July 19th. This is the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting, and Clackamas County Commissioner Paul Savas and Happy Valley Councilor Brett Sherman are your co-chairs, and the meeting is yours.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. Councilor Sherman, you want to take the lead this morning?
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Always good to see everyone. And we have a comfortably full agenda today. So I think, we'll just jump right into it. Grace Jo is here to give us an update on the MTIP program. So the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good morning. I am about to share my screen, so I really hope this all goes successfully. Is everyone seeing a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Or excuse me, a PDF of a PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
I'm just going to zoom it to be the full screen, or at least full fit visible. All right. Well, again, thank you very much, Chair and Co-Chair, for allowing me to present an overview of the 2024 through 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, which I will be referring to as the MTIP for short. My name is Grace Cho. I'm a senior transportation planner at Metro in our Planning, Development, and Research Department, and I lead the development work for the MTIP. Ooh. So just to begin, a brief refresher on what the MTIP is. The MTIP has three main components, and it's a multifunctional document. The first component is a regionally significant list of transportation projects and programs in the Portland metropolitan region, which are scheduled to receive funding. That list is a reflection of an exercise to select near-term transportation investments that advance goals and the vision outlined in the regional transportation plan, which I know you'll be hearing about a little bit more shortly. There is a corresponding report, which outlines, a second component is that there's this corresponding report, which outlines how the development of the MTIP and the list of projects identified complies with various federal regulations, which we're required to comply with. And then lastly, the MTIP outlines the administrative procedures for modifying that list of regionally significant transportation projects and its schedule to receive funds once it becomes effective. And all of this, I guess, probably the main key thing that I probably should mention here is that it's important that all of these pieces are part of the main document in order for us to be able to receive and expend federal transportation funding. Oops. So how did we get here? Well, since summer of 2020 through today, your representatives at JPAC and TPAC have been engaged by Metro, ODOT Region 1, and transit agency staff, so that's TriMet and SMART, on the allocation of federal transportation funds to different projects and programs in varying different capacities. This slide outlines a list of activities which TPAC and JPAC have heard throughout or actively participated in during that 3-year time frame. Some examples I just wanted to point out include the 2025 through 2027 regional flexible fund allocation. There have been updates on several ODOT funding programs, including their pedestrian and bicycle fund allocation program. And then each year we have the transit agencies in our metro region present on their budget process. And so the most recent presentation by SMART and TriMet happened this past spring, I believe in May. So that 3 years of work culminates to the adoption draft, which I'm going to go over here today with you all. So big picture, the 4-year investment program reflects a little over $1.3 billion of transportation investments spread over 130 transportation projects and programs. It also represents quite a mix of investments, which includes projects to maintain and preserve the existing transportation system, new capital projects to complete various system gaps, and then operation type projects to increase efficiency of the existing system. And then we have a handful of planning and regional programs. And so this is kind of the high level breakdown of that 4-year program. When we look at the 4-year program and how it breaks down by transportation mode or transportation type, what we see is that road and bridge type projects, as well as walking and biking type projects, comprise the bulk in terms of the number of projects. I do want to note in particular the walking and biking projects. We know that these tend to be kind of smaller scale and less costly projects. While I also want to note, while transit makes up the bulk of the 4-year program with a very small number of projects, I do want to note that about $500 million out of that $661 million that you're seeing here is dedicated to maintenance and preservation of the existing transit system. So think about replacement of aging buses, fixing light rail, fixing the bus garages and kind of the station areas. So I pulled this together in the last couple of days because I thought it would be the most of interest to this committee. When we look at the 24 through 2027 MTIP and the breakdown specifically for what's being invested in urban Clackamas County, what you begin to see here in these two different tables is that the majority of funding in Clackamas County, or the majority of transportation investments that's happening in urban Clackamas County, are centered around capital investments and then followed by preservation and maintenance. I do want to note that preservation and maintenance, the MTIP isn't a full reflection of all the local monies that typically goes into preservation and maintenance. It's just the federal and state portions plus any sort of local matching. So, you know, we know that there's typically a lot more money that goes into preservation and maintenance. When we look more specifically, again, at the investment types or by mode, again, that kind of breaks down similarly, like it follows the correlated similar pattern as the overall MTIP, in that roadway and bridge and active transportation tends to make up the bulk of the investment profile in urban Clackamas County. I do want to note and distinguish in the roadway and bridge section that notes about $99 million of investment. That does include a mix of both preservation and maintenance, as well as new projects as well. New capital projects, excuse me. Since it's been a topic that's come up at multiple different committees of Metro, I wanted to dig in a little bit and also note a little bit about the investment into safety that's occurring in urban Clackamas County. So in Metro's definition of how we designate a project, considering it as safety, is that the project needs to address a crash, address an issue or address a safety issue that leads to crashes, particularly those types of crashes that lead to fatalities and serious injuries. So it's a much more narrowed definition in terms of how we think about safety. I do want to acknowledge that many different transportation projects and programs contribute towards making the system safer, but Metro's definition is really centered around this is the primary purpose of this transportation project, is to address crashes, especially those that lead to fatalities and serious injuries. Again, what we see is that there's about $30 million of investment into safety overall, kind of big picture wise. And for context, in the overall MTIP, there's around, I believe, about $147 million going towards safety overall across the entire region. So, you know, proportionally, this seems, you know, very even. What I do want to note, which I find pretty interesting, is how strategic those safety funds are being used, and that they're really in most cases, over half of that safety funding is actually going towards addressing issues on high injury corridors, which we know are the facilities across our region that tend to have the highest crash rates, especially those crash rates that lead to fatalities and serious injuries. So really being thoughtful and mindful of how that is being, those safety funds are being spent. A few project highlights of that are in the 2024 through 2027 MTIP, specifically for Clackamas County, includes the following. We have the Regional Flexible Fund funded, or I should say, Willamette Falls Drive Complete Streets project in Westland. There is a bridge preservation project on I-205. So this is the Clackamas River southbound bridge, or so I guess it's south, yeah. And then also just to note, kind of new to this 2024 through 2027 are the region's first National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, also known as NEVI, projects. This is a new federal program that was created through the bipartisan infrastructure law to really advance the deployment of electric vehicle infrastructure across the US. So we have a project that spans along I-205 all the way from the Glen Jackson Bridge to the I-5 junction. So what is coming up and what are some of the next steps for the 2024 through 2027 MTIP? So setting the stage, after October 1st, the process of MTIP amendments begin. For this body, you probably end up discussing upcoming amendments in preparation of each JPAC meeting. So I would imagine this is probably something that occurs in a monthly manner. We do know that there are going to be some major MTIP amendments likely being requested during this 2024 through 2027 MTIP cycle. And so just a few listed below. More also important is that any transportation project and program that had federal transportation funding that would like to receive federal transportation funding in 2024, or that's kind of their planned schedule for funding, they'll be able to start accessing their programming starting October 1st of this year. And then more in the background is that once the 2024 through 2027 MTIP becomes effective, Metro staff will really be tracking project delivery obligations, all these things that are required for the purposes of reporting to our federal partners. But even though we are just finishing up an MTIP cycle, so the 2024 through 2027 MTIP cycle, we immediately begin right into the development of the new MTIP cycle, so the 2027 through 2030 MTIP. Some activities have already begun. For example, the 2027 through 2030 State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP, which is led by ODOT and primarily led through the Oregon Transportation Commission. They've already begun discussions about their statewide revenue forecast and funding priorities, and that has effects as to how that ultimately that information kind of trickles down into what transportation projects and programs get selected by ODOT regions for investment. So it has that crossover. That information will also feed into what Metro staff will be developing over the course of the next few months, which is the 2027 through 2030 MTIP financial forecast or revenue forecast, so of similar nature. So this is kind of a high picture level estimate of revenues we anticipate between 2020 federal fiscal years 2027 through 2030, just to kind of give a sense of, like, are we talking about a $1.3 billion package again? Are we talking about a 1.1? Could it potentially be higher? So this is the exercise that we'll be going through. So next steps, tomorrow I will be requesting JPAC approval and recommendation to adopt the 2024 through 2027 MTIP by Metro Council. Following the adoption action, fingers crossed that approval and recommendation moves forward. We will, Metro staff will then package the 2024 through 2027 MTIP and submit for inclusion in the 2024 through 2027 STIP. ODOT will then package the 2024 through 2027 STIP and submit it to federal partners. And then we anticipate receiving our federal approvals by October 1, 2023, so the new TIP can become effective. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions, comments, thoughts for discussion.
Very good. Thank you for the information, Ms. Cho. Appreciate that. And I see fast on the draw with the quickest hand. Mayor Milch, floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the difference between the STIP and the MTIP. I know Secretary Buttigieg was in town a couple of weeks ago to talk about the 82nd Avenue project up in Portland, where jurisdiction over that ODOT road was handed over to either Multnomah County or Portland. I can't remember which it is. Is it necessary to have that jurisdictional oversight changed in order for a project to come under MTIP? For example, 99E in Clackamas County is an ODOT road. Would it have to change jurisdiction in order for local level projects to be part of it?
If I fully understand the question, I believe the simple answer is no. Federal transportation funds, when it's being allocated to projects and programs in the metropolitan region, need to be included in both the STIP and the MTIP. We do work with the, local agency and partners to actually determine, who's the lead agency or the project delivery agency and all those things. But it's really, quirks of every individual transportation project has a set of quirks. And so we have to work through all those details at an individual level. And that's where my colleague, Ken Lobeck, really comes in, and he's working directly with your staff, essentially, on those questions.
Thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, Grace. If you could send us the PowerPoint for this. Evidently, it's not in our packet. But I do have a comment, I guess. It's not really a question, but as a member of this group for several years, I recall us talking about, criteria or opportunities to shape criteria to meet our needs. And recently, in the last year or more, we've been giving tours to some of the regional transportation leaders, Commissioner Five from Washington County, Commissioner Mingus Maps, Portland City Council, Metro councilors and others, giving them tours of both the I-205 corridor and the Highway 212 corridor to show them how wildly unimproved those particular portions of the corridor are, yet they are in some of our most urbanized areas, or on the way to. So areas between the Rock Creek Junction and 172nd are, and not anywhere near even look like an urban arterial, yet they are. And Willamette Falls Drive, which one you have listed, for example, east and west of that improvement that Westland did is some very backward roads. I mean, they're old rural farm roads. If not, well, not necessarily all farm roads, but it seems to me that and this is no criticism towards my friends in Westland at all whatsoever, but I know the criteria basically presents itself in a way that redoing a downtown area like Willamette Falls Drives is, that improvement's nice and all, but it's just one stop sign over, the whole complexion of that road completely changes, and yet that is part and parcel. That's the third lane of I-205. There is no safe travel whatsoever east or west of that improvement, and so unless the criteria changes to make unimproved areas more eligible for MTIP funding, we will continue to do the same thing over and over again. And I just want to make, that's a comment, not a criticism, but I just wondered if we can actually at some point have some criteria that allows some of these grossly unimproved roads with no sidewalk, bike ped facilities whatsoever, some opportunity for funding in the long run. That's why it's just a comment, no need to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Grace, for that briefing. You have 183 million earmarked for biking and walking. Of course, those things are important to us, but is it critical right now in view of the fact that we have this funding shortfall for the I-205 improvement? And you also have quite a little money in there for safety, which is also important. But should we not be able to fund the I-205 without tolling, your big safety problem is going to be the unsafe situation that's caused by diversion. So I'm wondering, does this MTIP plan for 24-27 take into consideration the pressing problem we have with funding that I-205? Thank you.
Again, if I understand the comment and question, I think the simple answer is, I'm not exactly sure if there is a simple answer.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Grace, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't need a question answer this morning, but that's just my thinking on this. Okay.
Yeah, I think my initial response is that the MTIP is a reflection of multiple allocation processes that are led by Metro, ODOT, TriMet, and SMART to allocate federal transportation dollars. And so each of those allocation processes have kind of their own criteria as to how the selections occur. Now, some of those criteria are actually federally are kind of derived from federal policies. So certain funds are restricted to only certain types of activities. But then from there, there's more of an active policy discussion that occurs. That's why I wanted to note the current discussion that's happening with the 2027 through 2030. Now I know that's looking a little further out. STIP discussion and how as ODOT through the Oregon Transportation Commission is currently having a discussion around their statewide revenue forecast of federal and relevant state transportation funds, and how that and their policy priorities around the expenditure of those funds. For Metro's process, we have something called the Regional Flexible Fund Allocation, which we have a dialogue with our Metro counselors as well as members of JPAC and TPAC about, what's the policy lens being applied. So in trying to get back to your question, I suspect that there are certain allocation processes that had certain aspects of your question in mind as those allocation decisions were made about, say, the impacts around diversion. But the MTIP is a result of several allocation processes. So I guess where I'm going, that's not necessarily something that's easy to pinpoint that it's like, oh, directly, yes, this is all the reflection. And I guess where I want to go is that at this stage in the development of the MTIP, the decisions have been made. This is not the beginning where we're saying, here's kind of the big revenue estimates, these different allocation processes are coming to you to have a policy discussion. This is really kind of the reflection of the last 3 years from 2020 through now, essentially, of those funding decisions. So I don't want to give the impression that I know the discussion with I-205 is a little bit more of a recent I don't want to say like a recent discussion, but the news around tolling, which has affected the I-205 project, the actual like major capital improvement project,
Mhm.
is a little bit more of a recent
Mm.
event.
Thank you, Grace. But let me just add one thing. For the MTIP to be responsive to our transportation needs, it needs to be flexible to the changes that are happening in our state and the changes that are happening regarding the I-205 Abernathy project. We need to be able to adapt to changing situations in this budget situation we have. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Barry, you're up.
Guys, thank you for that presentation. I thought you did a really nice job. I have two questions. So for this presentation, the MTIP, is it based on the 2018 RTP or list, or is it on the current list?
It is based off of the 2018 RTP at this time because it is the adopted RTP. The 2023 RTP, once it becomes adopted later this year, will definitely have an influence over the development of the 2027 through 2030 MTIP, which is the next one that we're looking towards.
Okay, thank you. And then also, in light of future tolling and equity and other issues, high capacity transit should be a priority. And so I was searching for information on the West to Salem priority for a study there, and I didn't see anything. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, that would probably be information my colleague, Ali Holmquist, would probably be better positioned to be able to respond to, since she has been leading all our transit planning work, as well as the update of the high capacity transit plan. I apologize. Unfortunately, I do not have any information. And so I'm happy to forward your question on to Ali and have her get back to you.
Okay, because in our view for the city of Wilsonville and I think surrounding jurisdictions, we see that as a high priority. So just note it. Thank you.
Very good. Appreciate that. Commissioner Savis, I'm going to jump in for 1 second, and I'll turn it over to you. So I have a question and a comment. And the first is, it seems that with our 30-day open comment period, we had very, very few comments submitted. And so, as just your thoughts, is it just because maintenance isn't very sexy? It's not very, intriguing to people to like get them excited and get them involved. Do we need to do better outreach? Or is it just, you take some comments, you take into account what they have to say, and you really doesn't move the needle one way or the other?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. And it's something Metro staff have been noodling over since we received some of that feedback at JPAC last month. And I think there is a little bit of that in that this current MTIP, as it looks right now in terms of the profile of projects that are in the adoption draft of the 24 through 2027 MTIP, it's really centered on a lot of like smaller scale kind of local projects. None of the major projects are included at this time. So I'm thinking, say, like Multnomah County's earthquake ready Burnside Bridge, or any of the major projects ODOT's working on in the Portland metro region. And this is actually the first MTIP in a long time that we haven't had a high capacity transit project included in it. And it's typically those kind of higher profile projects that typically generate a lot more comments. I think we can do better with our outreach for certain. This was a little bit of a slide back from previous years where we have received more feedback and commentary, which then that information helps inform how we approach the next development of the MTIP cycle. I also want to note that I believe at the time that we were doing our public comment, which was this past spring, there was also several other major public comments happening that were pretty active. I believe the I-5 Rose Quarter supplemental environmental assessment was like part of that public comment was hanging over into this period. So I think there might have just been a lot of public comments happening at once that people had to pick and choose where they would expend their energy.
Okay, I appreciate that. And my comment today is really just more a personal one. It can be very disheartening at times. While we look at the numbers and, you know, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are allocated seem like really big numbers. Commissioner Savas, you know, referred to the interchange from like the Rock Creek interchange to 172nd, you know, out toward like Happy Valley direction. And we look at a project like that, like the Sunrise Corridor, that is a full build out is $500 million plus or minus. Just a simple fix is 80 million. And we're not even on the radar for years. And so it can be, I'm just wondering kind of how we can coordinate the various programs, the various buckets that we have to accelerate the process so I can see some movement on an area that will generate jobs and create housing. And I'd like to see that before I go to the happy hunting ground. And so I don't know how to reconcile those numbers, because we do have obviously, you know, an underfunded situation across the state. And so, you know, no comment necessary. I just wanted to spout this morning. So I appreciate your time. Commissioner Savas, it's all you.
Well, thank you. Well, just appreciate you mentioned that, Councilor Sherman, that section again. Every time I drive through there, I'm reminded by the roadside memorials about the accidents that happen through there. And so it's extremely dangerous through there. And I have tried to get my staff to actually go out there with me and maybe do a video of it. They won't even get out of the vehicle. So they're not even allowed to get out of the vehicle to even walk along that section. It's that dangerous. So again, roadside memorials are a reminder. But I did want to get back to a point. I'd be remiss maybe not to really bring this up, but I appreciate Commissioner Scholl's response or question, and also Grace, your response. These cycles, we are at the end of the cycle, right? We are now working on the other cycle. So we have to, we pull from our long range plans, our TSPs. And the nature of election cycles is that the folks that were around this table are, with the exception maybe of myself, maybe Mayor Buck, maybe, I don't know, that weren't here when those discussions were happening and decisions and criteria were being shaped. So the nature of it is that these funds and the way they're funded is not as nimble. I think Commissioner Scholl used the word flexible. I would love to be able to be more flexible, but just want to remind everyone the comment I made at the JPAC meeting last week, and I think I mentioned it here or last month, was that the TSPs did not anticipate tolling. None of our TSPs anticipated tolling. So it takes years to really do the traffic flow analysis and evaluate how we're going to build safety and congestion relief and all the things that come along with diversion. And the reason we didn't include that, and probably West Linn and Oregon City and all the other cities didn't include that, because when we supported this 205 project, we were looking at the 205 project as the answer for diversion. Tolling completely countered that and put us in a position where now we are not just facing diversion as a result of the bottleneck, which apparently may not be built, or the lanes may not be built, but now with tolling on top of it, we are not prepared. So we're putting all this effort and money and staff time on an RTP for the next 5 years, and it's already outdated because none of us anticipated tolling or congestion pricing or anything else. So I just want to put that out as commentary, that I wish we could be more nimble with this, but there's very few resources. I think that was also mentioned. But if safety is a priority, I really think that maybe the unimproved areas, again, need some kind of a bucket where that somehow that funding can be addressed within the metro boundaries. Thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Savas, thank you very much. And I think, with that, it's a good opportunity to transition. Ms. Cho, thank you very much for the time this morning. Solid presentation and always good comments from the group. So we will be moving into the RTP public review draft. And I see that Ms. Ellis, you have made your way into the lion's den. Welcome.
Yes, Thank you. Excited to be here. I'm going to give a very brief presentation and focus on just the comment period, as you said, that's underway, but also give some highlights of Chapter 8. That is the chapter in the Regional Transportation Plan that maps out future work between now and the next update, and other planning work that is not that we were not able to fully address as part of this update. Can you see the screen okay? Great. And this is an opportunity to ask questions about where we are in the process of Chapter 8 itself, but also if there's questions about other parts of the Regional Transportation Plan, I'm happy to take those too. This is just a reminder of the process that we've been going through. You've received many updates and had many discussions already throughout the process. We are working to have the plan adopted by JPAC, the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, and the Metro Council by the end of November, in advance of the current plan's expiration date, which is December 6th. And that is important that we meet that deadline in order to ensure that the federal transportation funding, some of which Grace just described, can continue coming to the region. Throughout the process, there's been a lot of discussions at different tables and different events, also significant community engagement in person, online, and through consultation meetings, stakeholder interviews, and we've entered the final public comment period. It started a little over a week ago, July 10th, and it will run through August 25th. So this is a formal opportunity for you all to share any feedback that you have, but you'll have opportunity as well through the upcoming JPAC and Metro Policy Advisory Committee discussions, as well as your membership participates in those conversations. In the packet, I included a one-page summary fact sheet on different ways to provide comments on the draft plan. There's a project website that has all of the materials that are subject to public review, as well as an online comment form. We have an online survey that's more higher level, but email, letters, voicemail messages, leaving comments. There's a public hearing scheduled for a week from tomorrow, July 27th, before the Metro Council at 10:30. So that's an opportunity to directly engage with the Metro Council on that. And then we will also, in addition to the different policy and technical advisory committee discussions that are planned, we will be having consultation with tribes, also consultation with federal, state, and regional agencies and natural resource agencies, as we're required to under federal law. The two primary pieces of what is available for public review is the draft Regional Transportation Plan. It's 8 chapters and many supporting appendices that are a part of that, including Appendix A, which is the draft project list. Also, the draft high capacity transit strategy that's also been developed over the past year as part of the Regional Transportation Plan update process. So that too has some appendices as part of that document. In your packet, we provided links or the executive summary for the Regional Transportation Plan. So both the Regional Transportation Plan and high capacity transit strategy have executive summaries with links to different parts of the plans or strategy that you can also look at more closely, as part of your review. And also, as a reminder, we have an online map that really allows for more exploration of the draft project priorities that were submitted by all of the jurisdictions. So each city, the counties, ODOT, TriMet, SMART, and the Port of Portland, and in your case, the Clackamas, North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. There are projects that they submitted to the regional transportation plan, both to the constrained project list, which are the things that we are reasonably expected to have funding available during the plan period, and that's a total of $68 billion, which also includes some maintenance and preservation investments in the system. And then there's a broader strategic list of projects that are additional priorities that have been identified in previous planning efforts as priorities, but for which don't fit within the financially constrained budget. Those are all available for review and feedback as part of the public comment period. So in terms of Chapter 8, I want to just transition to that. This is what your staff thought would be helpful for you to start thinking about in preparation for discussions at the September JPAC meeting. Chapter 8 of the Regional Transportation Plan really outlines future work for the region to do together. There's regional programs that Metro is responsible for that are implemented on an ongoing basis through the Unified Planning Work Program that JPAC and the Metro Council adopt each year. But there are regional planning efforts, and I'll highlight some of what's recommended in Chapter 8 as part of the public review draft. There's also further corridor refinement planning. And this is where there's more in-depth corridor level planning work that's needed to address identified needs that aren't fully resolved in the RTP at this time. There's also a section in Chapter 8 that maps out all of the different major project development work. So basically the projects that are in the RTP, but they're still going through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act work. So this includes the I-205 tolling project, the regional mobility pricing project, the interstate bridge replacement. So I'll highlight that a little bit more. And then the last section of the plan is really around the data and tools development that really are needed to support local and regional planning going into the future. Metro maintains a lot of data and tools that we use in our work as part of the regional transportation plan, but it's also many of them are used and available for local partners, state partners, and others as well. So in section 8.2 of Chapter 8, these are the list of regional planning, region-wide planning activities that are proposed to move forward. There's ongoing transit planning that both SMART and TriMet do that we identify there, but other more specific efforts are aimed at including equitable development strategies as part of investment area planning. So when major corridor plans are happening, such as the Southwest Corridor, when that work was happening, an equitable development strategy was developed as part of that work. Also, there's the Columbia Connects project, which is in Northeast Portland, North Portland area that is carried forward from the last RTP. There's also been discussions happening, bi-state discussions around the Cascadia corridor and high-speed rail that will be continuing in the next 5 years. That's identified in there. Also identified is what's called workforce diversification, and that's really trying to get at the fact that there's major transportation investments happening in the region, and there's more work that could be done to ensure that the workforce that is supporting that, both from the contracting consulting side as well as the construction side of those investments, that it's helping create pathways for people of color, people with low income, for jobs, and being very intentional about that. There's a regional framework that Metro developed. It's called the Construction Careers Pathway Program. JPAC will receive an update on that work tomorrow morning as part of that meeting. And several jurisdictions in the region have adopted that framework and are implementing it. So this is just trying to elevate it more at a regional scale and recognition that there's major investments that are happening in our region, and we should be really intentional about that. There'll be further work on the regional mobility policy update that we've been working on in advance of the regional transportation plan update, but also to further implement it following adoption. The transit study, the first last mile, this is something that you all have talked about previously. That is identified as a near-term priority. We also have updates to our functional plan that are needed to support implementing the new RTP policies, but also the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking that was adopted last year. A freight rail study, emergency transportation routes project phase 2. So this is that effort. It's a partnership with the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization, and this for the 5-county region, not just the Oregon side, but it also includes Clark County and Columbia County to do further planning work to tier those routes that were identified back in 2022. The 2040 refresh has also been a topic of discussion, different committees, and we're awaiting further direction and discussion by the Metro Council on the timing for when sort of a review of the 2040 growth concept and update to that. And then the last item here is called out and has been carried forward from the last RTP, which is a funding strategy for regional bridges. In particular, that strategy based on TPAC's discussion, they have provided feedback that it really should be a broader strategy that's not just about the regional bridges, but all of transportation in the region as we continue to work to finalize the RTP. Refinement planning, there are several corridors for which there's additional work to identify multimodal transportation solutions to address the needs, and really using that corridor refinement planning as a way to link not just addressing transportation needs, but how does it support equity, economic development, housing, and other goals. So there's several of those that are identified for future work. And then these are the major project development areas that I started to list off a little bit earlier, but these are all efforts that are going to continue to do more in-depth planning before going to construction, and they're all at different stages of where they are in that federal and state planning work to advance to that next phase. And then the data and tools, as I said, the Metro has a responsibility for maintaining regional data and tool sets that really help support our planning work and prioritization of the work, both in terms of policy priorities and advancing the RTP goals, but also to support local transportation system plan updates, other corridor and area plans that local governments may do, ODOT, as well as Metro at the regional level. And so those are outlined in the chapter. So in terms of what's ahead, we're going through the comment period. As I said, it goes through August 25th. We do expect to receive a lot of feedback from the community, jurisdictional partners, also community-based organizations and others through the different formats that I described earlier. And we will be responding to and making recommendations about refinements to the draft RTP, as well as the high capacity transit strategy that we will be working with the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee and the Metro Technical Advisory Committee that then will be brought forward to the policy committees and Metro Council for review. In some cases, further discussion before being asked or asking the policy committees and council for final action. Impacts action right now is scheduled in October, and then JPAC and the Metro Council final action are scheduled for November. So there will be a lot of, a lot of discussion, in these upcoming meetings, and so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts today and any questions that you may have about the process. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. So I can
Very
see
good.
y'all.
Thank you, Kim. Lots of information. Appreciate that. And Trent, can we bring in staff to comment before we jump into questions?
Thank you for that. Yes, I just invited Karen and Jamie to come in here, and just saying what she said in a different way, process wise, is Kim visited, or we had some information about the RTP back in June. Chapter 8 wasn't. It was pretty fresh. It was like just out, or it had come out like a day or two later after your meeting in June. So this was an opportunity for Kim to come back and share some of those details and information. And another thing that she mentioned is that public comment period is open. And I think a lot of our jurisdictions will submit public comments to that process, and C4 has an option to do that as well. But given that timeline, if you want to do that, now that you have all the information with Chapter 8, this is really your chance to make a decision whether you would like to make a comment or not. And then you'll need, what we can do is I can work with staff to create a draft that will be approved at the C4 meeting, where all of our votes are taken for the C4 purposes. That's not something you have to do. It's not required that the coordinating committees submit comment, but that's an option for you if you want to do it. And I think it's really important for staff like Karen and Jamie to be here, who are your TPAC team, to sort of inform if that's the right approach, or if there are appropriate reactions to Chapter 8 or the rest of the comment period here. So you could address your questions to Kim on the technical issues or items that she presented on, or if we want to get into the reactions of the Chapter 8 materials, Karen and Jamie are here for that too.
Very good. Thank you very much. I will open it up. Wow. All right, Commissioner Shull, thank you.
Thank you. I just got to say this. Here we look at the RTP. Yeah, by the way, Kim, thanks for the briefing. We look at the RTP, and in there is a major project called the I-205 tolling project. And, you know, has Metro capitulated to ODOT on this inevitable idea that tolling is going to happen? We need Metro to be in solidarity with the counties that are going to be most affected by tolling, in particular Clackamas County. We need to work together on this. I'm telling you, the more we breathe I-205 tolling project, the closer we get to tolling actually happen, which is the most dreaded thing that we have on the horizon in Clackamas County. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Anyone else? Oh, Mayor Butt, please.
Thanks, Councilor Sherman. Yeah, Kim, thanks for the presentation. I wanted to ask about I saw the list of the planning projects. There's nothing about, electric vehicle infrastructure. Does the RTP contemplate kind of our region strategy around that in other ways?
We do. Thank you, Mayor Buck. So one, the climate smart strategy does speak to the electrification and assumes the electrification of the transportation system going forward. Most of the work around electrification is really being led at the state level by the Oregon Department of Transportation, and then also through other rulemaking work that the Department of Environmental Quality have been doing. And so we have not identified further planning at a regional scale for that, but that, if that's something of interest, I think what we have heard from TPAC in particular is Chapter 8 should represent sort of the top priorities of things that in the next 5 years, and is development of a regional EV or electrification plan sort of in that realm versus some of the other items that are in there. So that is not currently something that is called out in Chapter 8, but we do acknowledge that, and a lot of the work has been happening at the local level and the state level, and so that there wasn't sort of something identified for a regional level plan.
Thank you, Kim. Given the fact that Oregon's phasing out the sale of the gas vehicles by 2035, and there's really, and yes, ODOT is doling out these grants, I suppose, running these programs. I just know from work that Lake Oswego is trying to do around how we approach, the EV infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, that, I mean, we're not receiving any guidance from any agency at all. We're just left to do it ourselves. So I would love to see Metro take more of a lead and working with the cities, and probably accelerating the work, given, you know, the fact that it's 2023 and, you know, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, no, that's helpful feedback. Thank you.
Very good. Actually, question related to that, and this may or may not be the right forum. Is the expansion of EV availability, is that like a public-private partnership where we're working with private providers to incorporate this infrastructure? Is this just a public-only thing? I'm just kind of curious how that works, if you know.
I think it's a combination. You know, in some cases it's led by the public agencies, but there's many examples that it is public, private, and the utilities have been very involved in the state level work, for example. So it's a combination of both.
I would assume that it's an incredible long-term moneymaker if you have the ability to deliver that, given the direction that we're going. So just kind of curious. Okay, Councilor Lewis, it's all you.
Sure, thanks so much. I guess I have two thoughts. The first is with regard to Mayor Buck's question on EV. I think that we do have cities now going toe-to-toe with ODOT for federal funds for electrification. And that makes me feel like it is no longer something that we can just let ODOT have their arms around. So I will be advocating that we do more for electrification as a region, to make sure that local corridors are getting planned for. I do think that there is a need for a statewide strategy. There's a need for making sure that Beyond the Region has its own unique funding plan. And at the same time, we have corridors in the region that are going to be moving forward with federal funding requests, and Metro should be a part. To the same extent, I do hope that Chapter 8 will also include some strategies for future development of engagement in the region around future funding. And I guess that brings me to come back to Commissioner Scholl's question or challenge of Metro in the face of 205 and tolling. And I do believe that our agency, despite having an agency position where you might call it inevitable, we do see a future of congestion pricing. I think our agency has been lockstep with Clackamas County in the inequities and the poor design of what ODOT is doing on tolling in 205. Further, I think we've added value so that it is not Clackamas County and the cities of Clackamas County going it alone against ODOT, but we have pulled together the rest of the region. And right now we have City of Portland singing from the same songbook, playing by the same playbook as Clackamas County. When has that happened? So I do think that right now we are in a moment of opportunity, and I don't want to see Clackamas County trying to put dispersions on Metro, because if we start to fracture, that's when we fail. Right now we're all together. Let's stay together. If you need more from Metro, please contact me. Please work through staff process that's already helping make sure that ODOT can't slam this thing through. We've got to keep sticking together. We've got to bring Washington County further with us. I'm going to call it out right here. Washington County is going to be first to go because they don't have anything that's told. Keep Washington County close, keep Portland close, then we're going to be able to win as a region.
Good comments. Thank you very much, Commissioner Savis.
I thank you, Councilor Lewis, for your comments. I concur with, I think, almost everything you said there. It is important that we stick together. I do want to just highlight again, just quickly, and then I'll shift over to the electrification aspect. I do want to highlight the fact that none of us are jurisdiction wise are really prepared in the RTP or our TSPs to factor in adequately, in my opinion, the charging aspect, and also the diversion or the road improvements that address whether it's RMPP or whether it's tolling bridges or whatnot. So we have a lot of work to do. But what I want to shift to is that and maybe Councilor Lewis, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. It seems to me that when I look at other states, there's an article recently just came out that Oregon and Washington, Oregon is 44th in the nation, least prepared for electrification, and yet we have this awareness or our self-awareness that somehow we think we're really ahead of the curve. And I think the fact that we don't have a lot of charging infrastructure in place, and per capita or per electric vehicle, I forgot exactly what that article was, what the metrics were that brought that to bear. It seems to me, as I look at other states that have prepared, they've incorporated that in their land use aspect. So for example, if you're going to open up a restaurant or a hotel along a corridor, you're mandated to have charging stations. We don't. So it seems to me that that's a large role for MPAC to take a stronger lead on in the cities. And I'm not talking TSPs per se. I'm really talking our land use policies, that if we really want to step into the game, which we have to, for all the reasons that we all know of, we are so far behind. I've been pointing this out for years, and we just got to get ahead of it. I just don't see the coordination. It's though, we want to see electrification, but if we're really invested, we need to take a stronger role in doing that. And Councilor, I'd like to know your thoughts. Is that a greater discussion for MPAC to get in front of? Why we've been lagging so far behind? And again, that's not a criticism. That's just an observation. Thank you.
Sure, Commissioner. I don't know the article that you're referencing. My gut is that it's probably based off of not a per capita, but a per electric vehicle, because we do have a lot of electric vehicles. And so that would probably naturally move us towards being even more down the list than we should be. But I think that the state focus has been on residential charging, with the idea that if somebody can charge at their place of residence, that will incentivize them to get into the system. But I think, their attention to multifamily housing readiness leaves short the kind of true behavioral dynamics of somebody's going to want to plan their route or their frequent routes to know if they can have an electric vehicle. And yes, there is the, kind of corridor plan. That is how the federal government has rolled out their funding. But I think in addition to corridor planning, you're right that there are certain types of land use that should just be places of basic charging accommodation. We could have a similar kind of standard as, other kinds of public accommodation. So that would be a good ripe discussion for MPAC. And I think it would have to be a conversation of, kind of some study. And then if it was declared an item of regional concern, that would make it, kind of a purview of a regional standard, or else we would just have to coordinate with cities to do their own standards. But I'll bring it back to my council.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor, for that. And one other thing I want to just, now that the state legislature is now doing land use, apparently, what's not part of the deal when they relieve some of those parking restrictions, the first thing I thought of, again, with this charging infrastructure in the back of my mind, if we don't have parking or we don't have charging stations mandated for residential units, we're not ready. Again, getting back to Mayor Buck's point, we're not even close to being ready. So I think we need to make sure that the legislature is informed. It's, frankly, a lot of it's their policies for carbon reduction. It seems counterintuitive not to have places for people to park their car. I jokingly said when that legislation passed, I go, so when people get home, to your point, if the charging is not available at your residence because no parking's allowed, or you're parking a mile away or a quarter mile away because there's no parking there, I mean, are we going to be buying people, quarter mile long extension cords? I say that as a joke, right? But we are not thinking in a long-term way, in a very sophisticated way to address this issue. And I really think it's simply not something that needs to be embedded in our TSPs, but has to be included in our land use policies as well. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the comments. Any others, staff? Do we want to do a TPAC update as well? Do we have additional information for us today?
So I guess a couple of things just on this particular topic. I wanted to highlight that one, in the TPAC packet on, I believe it's page, or your packet today on page 64, is kind of a summary of some ideas that were brought up during the TPAC discussion on Chapter 8. And some of those topics align with what you have been talking about today. Those topics of how really should the RTP address EV infrastructure, and the recommendation to potentially add a project into Chapter 8 that really talks about the importance of regional engagement on this conversation. Another topic that you have talked about today has to do with transportation funding broadly. Right now, there's a project that talks about a transportation strategy for bridges, but really it's more broadly now. We've moved more into a broader conversation. And then the final piece where I think I've heard conversation around the table really is how should either how should tolling be represented in Chapter 8, or are there ways in the way tolling is described that we're able to insert the importance of a congestion pricing system being designed appropriately and working with local partners to be able to develop that. Some sort of language there. So for those type of topics, there may be a reason that C4 it would be beneficial for C4 to submit a letter, a real focused letter. But I would also highly recommend that each of you work with your staff if your jurisdiction individually wants to submit comments. And there are a variety of ways to submit comments. There's an online tool that Metro has developed. Letters can be sent if you want to be able to have more specific comments that you feel are outside the online tool. But that might be a venue for each jurisdiction to be able to focus on those things that are important to individual jurisdictions. So those are my thoughts about kind of comment on the RTP and Chapter 8 as well. I would also say that, over the past 3 years, staff has been working, and we have been working and bringing things to this body that have been elements of the RTP. So things have been worked on along the way, and above and beyond just the future projects that are in the RTP, there's a lot of different other elements, such as the different policies that have been are proposing to move forward and whatnot. So there's a lot there to dig into. But those are my thoughts. Did you have additional thoughts, Jamie?
No, I think you nailed it.
Very good. Thank you.
Do you want?
I'm sorry.
Yep. Thank you. So C4 members, do you want C4 to pursue a letter that we can bring to your August meeting? We can bring a draft with those 3 topics that Karen just laid out, or is this something that you'd like to approach individually as in your own communities?
Well, I know that I think having consistent messaging from the various jurisdictions, so whether it rolls up into C4, that to me always seems very helpful and can convey a more precise message. Doesn't mean we shouldn't still pursue that at the local level, but I do think it makes sense to potentially pursue it at the consolidated level as well. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, can you remind me again what the timeline is for public comment? Because I'm with that is said, I'll just, in all fairness, I want to just lay out, should we include this possibly as something to broach at this? Maybe you already said it, Trent, at the C4 meeting in August.
So C4 meeting is, I believe the public comment ends on the August 25th is what I think I saw on that slide. So you have one big C4 meeting, which is August 3rd before that. And that is your voting body, since this is just a subcommittee. So if you're going to approve a formal letter, it needs to go through that August 3 C4 meeting. And we can put together a draft based on the discussion here and what Karen laid out as the three bullets.
Okay, yeah, that would seem, give everyone some time to, look at the draft and run it by their colleagues at their councils, jurisdictions, whatnot, and make sure we're ready for, that discussion, in a couple weeks.
Sounds good.
Understood. We'll get that drafted and included in the packet a week in advance.
Very good. Karen, Jamie, anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I suppose I can talk a little bit about JPAC's agenda for tomorrow, if that's helpful. So JPAC's agenda is a little bit different than what we're talking about today. They will be considering a resolution for adopting the MTIP, but they will not be talking about Chapter 8 this month. Rather, they'll be receiving a legislative update, which looks like it'll include the legislative staff from Metro, from the Tri-County area, Tri-Met, Portland, and the Port of Portland. They'll also be talking about draft findings from the Regional Freight Delay in Commodities Movement Study. And by way of background, the purpose of this study is to evaluate the level and value of commodity movement on the regional freight network and to have a policy conversation or a policy framework for commodity movement in the region. And then finally, and NPAC members will be familiar with this, JPAC will be talking about transit-oriented development and the update of that program. This program helps to make strategic investments in high-density communities along the region's high-frequency transit network. This program is designed to help create compact and walkable communities by incentivizing higher density and mixed-use buildings near frequent service and high-capacity transit. Are there any questions?
Jamie, how, knowing, and I'm not being critical here, but from a practical standpoint, where do you see that applying to Clackamas County, knowing that our future of transit, at least in the areas except Wilsonville, maybe in Milwaukee, where there's not much transit infrastructure, where do you see that as applying to us? Is that something that we ought to take really seriously, or how do we grapple with that?
Well, I think we should take any funding opportunity seriously because we're Clackamas County and we're scrappy and we're out for funding. But the cool thing about this program is it doesn't just apply to frequent corridors. I believe it can also apply to 2040 centers. So places like Happy Valley could potentially be applicable. We may need to do some creative encouraging to see where we can apply this program and create those opportunities to really propel these urban expansion areas towards success.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I would also add that, yeah, it is not necessarily funding that goes specifically or has to go specifically to areas directly around light rail stations. So kind of like Jamie was saying, there may be other opportunities to partner funding, and a lot of the times it is used to partner funding with perhaps affordable housing development and whatnot to really achieve that density that you might want to see around frequent transit. So that's another place where we may see investments in Clackamas County.
Very good. Thank you for the comments. Any other questions or comments for staff? All right. You're both off the hook. Thank you so much for your time today. And looking at my agenda, I think we are down to an impact. Did we have an impact meeting? It's so hard to remember nowadays. I think we may have had one a while ago.
Commissioner Scholl had to leave early, but he left me a note that there was no meeting in June, and that so he didn't have a report today on any of that. And there is a meeting later in July on the 26th, but there's no agenda out yet. And then that's also a good reminder for me to share that there is no impact meeting in August and no JPAC meeting in August either. So tomorrow's JPAC meeting and the 26th impact meeting might be your next couple of meetings at that venue until September.
I'm trying to remember which impact meeting we talked about. Was community placemaking, was that 2 meetings ago that we were just talking about the small grants and how I was excited. One of the questions I had on that, and I just don't remember when it was about how Clackamas County seems to be very much underrepresented in the grants that are being received. And my question was, is that because we're turning in a lower proportion of grants than the other counties? And that was kind of the feedback, was we're not getting as many applications in. So it kind of led to the question, how do we engage the community to put more grants into the system? And then we also had that middle housing, urban growth management stuff. But again, I could be, there's like 6 meetings, so it could be at any one of those meetings. Councilor Lewis.
Sure. Just a direct reply on community placemaking. I'm one of the reviewers, and I have been, I think now for 4 cycles, maybe 5. And I will say that the proportion of grant applications that Clackamas County turns in is so far below. It's actually very hard to even imagine getting Clackamas its fair cut, because I review on average about 40 applications. On average, we get about 75 to 100 applications that are qualified. And then of those that I review, so of the half that I get to see, generally there's 5 or 6 that are from Clackamas County, and about half of those get funded. So I do think that we need to do more work to connect our local nonprofits and our kind of grassroots change makers to these grants. Again, they're really small dollar. I mean, some of them are for $7,000. They go up to $20,000-$25,000. It takes very little time to do these applications. It's like 6 questions and a budget. And if you don't even want to write the questions, you can respond to the questions orally over video. So I imagine that this is something that many of our partner groups could be doing in 2 to 3 hours. So let's get more in.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that information. Commissioner Savis.
Yeah, Counselor, I appreciate that, and my observation over several years is that you're correct. We don't submit a lot, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. And one of those reasons I have found, which is why I brought the criteria issue up earlier in the meeting today, is that sometimes the criteria and grants in general are structured in a way where we don't qualify. So some of our times our staff will say, we're not going to be able to be competitive. This particular grant or criteria might be such that, we're not, it's more built for, an environment like maybe downtown Portland, West Side or something like that. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And again, that's why I kind of mentioned sometimes we're just, again, in grants in general, we are, we're not either dense enough, or we don't have the transit, or, we don't have the eligibility. So I think it's a disincentive to apply. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, for the community placemaking grant specifically, it has nothing to do with the urban environment in which, or the suburban environment in which you're doing your community work. It has everything to do with your community vision of placemaking. So it's got to be driven at the grassroots level, particularly by people who have been underrepresented in the decision-making process. So the downtown Portland core has the advantage because they have all these nonprofits that are very culturally community specific, and we don't have that same infrastructure out in the suburbs. That said, I think our work, when we do get it, it's so much more organic, because it's like these people all live right here and really did come up with this project. It's not like this larger CBO kind of went out and wrote the grant for people. So I think, our organic nature is a it's a double-edged sword. Some of it's an advantage and some of it's just a disadvantage because we don't have as many, nonprofits out there kind of saying, look, you got to do this, you got to do this. It's really on us as local government leaders to get the awareness out there.
Very good information. Thank you. Mayor Milch.
Councilor Lewis, I think you sort of answered the question where I was going, but on this community placemaking, I'm also thinking in terms of regions like or communities like Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge, Oatfield, along the McLaughlin corridor, which I see as a potential high-speed transit corridor, not with rail, but with buses perhaps, or electric buses ideally in the future. Do these grant proposals tend to come from grassroots community members, or would something for those unincorporated urban communities in Clackamas County have to come at the county level from county government staff?
No, these grants, the grant dollars go to a nonprofit. Very few of these come in with a government letterhead attached to them. So absolutely unincorporated folks, particularly if they can partner with a nonprofit that can receive the funds. They don't have to set up their own nonprofit. They just have to partner with one. They would absolutely be extremely competitive.
Thank you.
Very good. And Mayor Buck.
Thanks, Councilor Sherman. Councilor Lewis, whenever I forget the meeting we were at where we heard the report about, the same thing. But anyway, it got me thinking. I have I have a group, it's a student group, be perfect for this kind of grant, and they have a project. And so I said, you guys need to apply for this placemaking grant, but could I connect them with you, since you've been reviewing the applications, to maybe help them get a better understanding of how they can present the strongest application possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Would be happy to connect with them. And ironically, I think Lake Oswego applications have been very successful in the past. You've got there was a canoe festival that happened. There were a few actually that took place in Lake Oswego. So whoever's been spreading the word in your community has been doing a good job.
That's great. Okay. Thank you, Councilor Lewis.
Very good. And I think closing out the impact topic, the other thing we did talk about, and again, I don't remember if it was the last meeting or meeting before, was the whole notion of middle housing potential kind of in the urban growth management area and the growth of that. And we had a presentation on it just about the number of homes that would be available for kind of that middle redevelopment. And it was the existing homes. It was a really small number. It was like 1 to 10% of any existing properties would be available for that. And so while there were, some opportunities on vacant land and low density residential areas, the true potential really wasn't huge, wasn't terribly impactful. And I guess, one of the thoughts in relation to that is, we've talked about kind of the expansion of, the urban growth areas and the opportunity to build out the areas that are available. Happy Valley, Old Damascus being a great example where, on paper, you've got this big chunk of land that's available, but from an infrastructure perspective, from a transportation perspective, it's incredibly expensive to move that ball forward. And so I think that's kind of the broader question that I always have is, okay, so how do we move this thing forward? How do we get that investment in infrastructure to make this a reality versus the notion that we're going to redevelop 1 to 10% of the existing homes in the region and somehow make them into higher density. So that's just my comment today. Felt like saying something to close us out. Anybody else have anything before we wrap up the meeting? All right. Always a pleasure to see all of you. Thanks for getting up and joining us this morning. Hope your day is spectacular, and this meeting's adjourned.